Well, welcome to the Ghostly Archives, everyone. I'm your host, Melissa Dawn, and I'm very honored to have on tonight's guest. But before I introduce him and bring him in, I have a little bit of an ask for the audience, okay? Um, if you are watching live, like many of you will be, would you please be able to, if you're not yet, subscribe? If you want to help support, I know a lot of people don't have the finances right now. It's a tough world out there, but you can do that also by liking the podcast, hitting the thumbs up on YouTube, sharing over all of your platforms, and supporting my guests by visiting their links. Also, if you're going to be listening to this later, say on the audio version of the podcast, you can do the podcast, The Ghostly Archives, a huge favor by giving this podcast 5 stars on whatever platform you are listening on. That helps us show up in the charts and it helps people become aware. So there's a few clicks goes a long ways, guys, and that helps support this podcast. Thank you so much. Now, my guest, Edd Schultz. He is no stranger to the world of ghoulies and ghosties and things that go bump in the night. He grew up in the 50s and 60s, fascinated by supernatural and the paranormal. He was a great fan of horror and science fiction. Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman were his favorite characters. He also loved Barnabas Collins of Dark Shadows, which is the best show, I might add. These things fueled his imagination. He soon became a performing magician and hypnotist, and he hypnotized his first subject at the age of 12. Although his early goal was to become a professional magician, like Houdini, his great hero. But during high school, he received a higher calling, and he eventually became an ordained priest in the Episcopal Church. Ed has a bachelor's degree in philosophy, a master's degree in theology, specializing in the psychology of religion. He also is a graduate of the Silva Method of psychic development. In the 1970s, he lectured extensively on the church and the occult in response to that occult explosion that happened in the 70s. During this time, he became co-founder and co-director of the Foundation of Christian Psychic Research, an educational organization designed to bring a Christian interpretation to the study of parapsychology and the paranormal. It was during this time that he worked briefly with the world-famous ghost hunters Ed and Lorraine Warren. Think the Conjuring movies, for those of you who may not know. He aided in investigations, performing exorcisms. He was also nicknamed the Psychic Priest by radio talk show hosts because of his experiments in remote viewing and intuitive diagnosis. He's also opened a practice, become a certified hypnotherapist, and his practice was called Hypnoticoach. He has offered numerous books on various subjects, including Be Still and Know, a practical guide to the Christian meditation. His latest project that he's working on, that he hopes to have done by the end of the year, is Confessions of a Psychic Priest. I got that all out. That is an amazing biography. So without much further ado, please welcome Edd Schultz to the show. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you, Melissa. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely fantastic. And I'm so glad to have you and all your experience on, the 70s. I love the 70s. I was born there, but I don't remember it. So I'm glad you're here because, my God, I do everything. Like I've talked about serial killers. I've talked about all things from the 70s, and it's such an amazing decade. Love it. But please go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us how you got into the paranormal and, what age you were, what prompted you to get into this when you were young.
Okay, thank you. Well, as you mentioned in the introduction, I grew up in the 50s and the 60s and was exposed to all kinds of horror movies, Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, all that kind of stuff. And I became fascinated with that. I was not the kind of kid who was scared and had nightmares and all that sort of stuff when I watched horror movies. I was kind of intrigued. It looked like, it might be fun. I was kind of aspiring to be an actor too when I was a little kid. And became interested in magic as a performing art when I was about 10 or 11 years old. And of course, that too was a springboard for my interest in the paranormal. One of my favorite types of magic is what's called mentalism, which is defined as the art or science of unusual feats of the mind. And that includes perception, telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, psychokinesis, things like that. I read a lot about Dr. J.B. Rhine from Duke University. And also, because of my interest in magic and my interest in Houdini, who was one of my heroes, there was a strange twist in Houdini's career. Toward the end of his career, his mother died, and he was very attached to his mother. He wanted to try to contact his mother on the other side. So he went to a medium, and the medium gave him a traditional seance. And in those days, they had what were called physical mediums who would sometimes make apparitions appear and ghostly trumpets and knocks and tilting tables and all that sort of fun stuff. And as Houdini was in the midst of this seance and his mother supposedly was speaking to him, Houdini realized these are all tricks. I'm the greatest magician in the world, and I know everything that you're doing. You're not talking to my mother, and besides, you're referring to me. You're saying that my mother is saying, Harry, everything is okay. Well, my name isn't really Harry Houdini. It's Eric Weiss. My mother never called
Mhm.
me Harry. So you're a fake. And he went on a campaign for many years to try to uh, debunk fake spirit mediums. Now, I think he really had a desire to be able to contact the other side, but he also was very disillusioned because most of the mediums at that time were fakes. In
Yeah.
fact, Houdini had a very special secret code with his wife. He said to his wife, Bess, when I die, I promise you I'm going to come back. And if I come back, and when I come back, I'm going to use a secret code that only you and I know. That way you'll know it's really me. And to this day, there have been numerous Houdini seances. He's never really come back. There was a big controversy, big scandal about the code. Somebody accidentally leaked it to the press or something like that. But that all fascinated me because not only was it talking about life after death, ghosts, spirits, things like that, but it was also talking about magic, which, as I said, was my hobby. So it all kind of fed into each other. And again, when I was about 10 or 11 years old, I was really into comic books too. And there's a series of comic books called Classics Illustrated. What they would often do is kind of reprint or retell classic stories from literature, Ivanhoe, Sir Lancelot, The Time Machine, other Jules Verne stories and things like that. They had two special editions that I scooped up right away. One was The Story of Magic or The History of Magic, and the other one was The Story of Ghosts. So I bought both of those, of course. The magic one helped me learn about some of the famous magicians of the past, and the ghost one really piqued my appetite because it did talk about poltergeist phenomena, it talked about apparitions, and it also talked in the end of the book about Dr. J.B. Rhine, whom many of your listeners may be familiar with, some may not. He was a biologist from Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, back in the 50s and even before that. And he's known as the father of modern parapsychology. He and one of his associates are the people who developed the famous ESP testing cards, the deck of 25 cards, 5 each of different geometric designs, a circle, a plus sign, 3 wavy lines, a square, and a star.
Mhm.
And those were used to test mathematically the probability of various kinds of ESP. So I went out as a magician. I could find, and a mentalist, I could easily find an ESP deck. So I I learned about all of that sort of stuff. And as I was really getting into this, I discovered, at least mathematically, I couldn't seem to demonstrate that I had any ESP. And then later on in the early 1970s, as I was still, I think I was still in seminary at that time, preparing to become
Mhm.
a priest, I heard about the Silva Method of mind control, which was, I think it was like a 24 or 48-hour course in which you learn to control your brain waves, alpha, beta, theta, delta, and learn to develop your psychic abilities in something that at the time, particularly at the time, wasn't really known as remote viewing or intuitive diagnosis. At the time, it was just called being psychic. But since then, we've come to use other terms, remote viewing and
Mhm.
intuitive diagnosis. So I developed my psychic abilities in that sense and was able to do some of the kinds of things that Edgar Casey did, being given the
Really?
name, age, and location of somebody somewhere in the world who is sick or injured, and was able at very first, with about an 80% degree of accuracy, to quote, diagnose their illnesses, or at least become aware of what their illnesses and injuries were.
Mhm.
And so as I became, when I was a young Episcopal priest, I was still very interested in all of this, and I began to see parallels between the world of the paranormal and parapsychology and the world of religious experience and mysticism and meditation and those sorts of things. So when I helped to found the Foundation for Christian Psychic Research, we were kind of trying to put the two together, parapsychology and religion, and try to interpret that for the church, because that was a time, the early 70s, when there was an occult explosion. The church,
Yes.
the traditional church, was so wrapped up in social action. There was the war in Vietnam, there was civil rights and all that sort of stuff. So everybody was going out and loving everybody and being a good neighbor and all that sort of stuff. But they were forgetting about the mystical part of the Christian experience. And I believe, and as many others do, that the human soul has within it this deep-seated desire to know the other, to know God, to know the supernatural, to know the other stuff that's beyond this life.
Mhm.
And because the church wasn't feeding people that, they looked other places. And at that time, the movie The Exorcist came out, Rosemary's Baby,
Mhm.
Damien, the all sorts of other things like witchcraft became much more prevalent. People started hearing about Wicca, and Anton Sandor LaVey, the high priest of the First Church of Satan, came out with a paperback Satanic Bible and other kind of literature like that. So people were being drawn into that whole, Ouija board, table tilting thing,
Yeah.
all of that sort of stuff. They weren't yet doing the kind of paranormal investigation that you see now.
Right.
Um, but there were people like Ed and Lorraine Warren who
Mhm.
started doing their thing in the 50s and 60s and into the 70s.
Yeah.
And I came across them when I was a young priest, and we had founded the Foundation for Christian Psychic Research.
Mhm.
And I heard them lecture at one point, saw their presentation, was kind of interested by that, intrigued, but still skeptical because, and I should say this probably from the beginning, because of my background in magic, hypnosis, philosophy, theology, etc., I'm very skeptical about any kind of paranormal or supernatural experience because
Right.
I know A, they can be faked, B, we can mistake other things for the paranormal. As
Right.
when I hypnotize someone as a hypnotherapist, I can make them cluck like a chicken or bark like a dog, but I can also make them see things that aren't really there through the
That's a really
power
good point.
through the power of suggestion. So, a lot of times when I hear some of these paranormal investigation things on YouTube and whatever, you experience a small group of very kind of hyped up and psyched people. Oh, what are we going to see? What are we going to see? We hear about this. We hear about that. We go into this old house. Creak. Oh, it's a ghost. It's a ghost. It's a spirit. Speak to me. Speak to me. Who are you? They get all excited because
Yeah.
they hear, it could be anything, a creaky floor, a mouse running around or something like that. And they immediately interpret that as something ghostly. Now, I will say maybe there are spirits there. Maybe there are discarnate spirits. I've had experiences that I wonder, maybe was there some spirit really here? And I'll be glad to tell you about my favorite experience at some point. But it all has left me very skeptical. I'm
Right.
a possible believer, like with the X-Files. I want to believe, but also just like Houdini, I want to make sure it's the real thing and not just something in my imagination or something that's fake.
Well,
So,
and I mean that goes to show like that's very trustworthy because you get a lot of the investigators that are out there today that work for TV shows and it's more about entertainment or
mhm,
producing something for, money or finances rather than show me the truth.
right, right.
So, guys, Ed is the real deal,
Thank you.
the truther.
And
I wanted to ask you one question though, because you were
sure.
talking before we get into that. Just briefly, I wanted to ask you about when you were talking about remote viewing. Just before we get
Mhm.
into Ed and Lorraine Warren in your cases, because I know a lot of people who want to are out there and are listening, and they want to get into that. How do you recommend people start with remote viewing or exploring that to increase their psychic abilities?
Okay. I would say the first thing to do is just to try it. It from apparently from the research, and maybe later we can talk about Project Stargate and all that kind of secret stuff. And Melissa, I don't know, but you just kind of disappeared from the screen. I don't see you, but
I'm still here. I was
oh,
just giving you the I was just giving
oh,
you the
okay.
audience.
Okay, that's fine. Um, the best thing to do is just to try it, and I'll tell you what to do. All you need basically are two people, and it does help if you both have a cell phone. One person stays, let's say, stays at home. The other person takes a drive anywhere. Don't tell we'll call the person who's at home the viewer, and we'll call the person who's going out the sender. The sender can drive anywhere that they want, stop at a predetermined time, let's say noon, and look at whatever you see there. And don't just look at it, but think about all of your five physical senses. What do I see? What do I hear? What do I smell? What do things feel like? And maybe what do I taste, depending on where you happen to be. The other person, the receiver, um, just gets maybe a pad of paper or something like that and writes down every impression that they have without censoring anything, without trying to figure anything out. Do I see circles? Do I see, oh, I feel cold right now. I get a sensation of water. I smell something that smells like the sea. I can taste something very bitter. All any of those kinds of uncensored experiences. Then what you can do is there are a couple of ways that you can handle this. One is if you get onto a kind of thing where you can see each other, like whatever it is. With I don't have an iPhone, I have an Android, but FaceTime or whatever. Show the person the scene and then have them kind of evaluate, gee, okay, there's a circle here. I see there's a Ferris wheel that you're looking at. There's the circle that I saw. And try to figure out which of those impressions that you got are accurately describing something that you see. One of the major rules of thumb in remote viewing is don't identify, describe. If you see,
Oh.
so that for example, because you can get waylaid very easily. If you say, for example, oh, I see a circle. Well, when I see a circle like that, I think of the wheels of a bicycle. Well, if it's the wheels of a bicycle, no, I hear a loud sound. Maybe it's a motorcycle. Well, don't do that. Just say, I see a circle, something circular, something big, something small, and then move on to something else. Because otherwise, you can fall into what's called analytical overlay, which is when your conscious mind begins to try to make logical sense out of something that your
I would
subconscious
totally do that.
mind.
I would totally start analyzing. I gotta stop it.
Mhm. Well, I do that myself. I was
Mhm,
on Dean Bertram's Talking Weird one time, and
mhm.
I asked him and his associate Jen Durrell to look at something there, and I tried to remote view what it was. And when I got to Jen, I said, "Okay, I see something that looks like a triangle, maybe like a three with three things like this, something straight down there, and something two things coming out like this, and it kind of reminds me of, and that was the mistake I made. It kind of reminds me of a peace sign, but from back in the '60s, the ban the bomb peace sign, and I started going in that direction. Well, it had nothing to do with that. I was pretty accurate because she was looking at a crystal, one of those pyramid shaped type crystals. So there's the shape, there's the triangular shape, but I tried to analyze it too much and try to identify it, so I get off on a different track, and so
Wow. Okay,
that's the
well, that's
kind of thing.
interesting.
Mhm.
That's interesting. So I hope everybody listens heard that, and it kinda gives you a place because a lot of people don't know they're interested, but they're like, "Well, what do I do? Do I get a book? Do I
Right.
meditate?" And so that's
Right.
fascinating.
Well,
Excellent.
there are also. Let me give you a couple of resources. There is a, and I'm trying to remember the initials. There's an International Remote Viewing Association. I think it's IRVA, and I think there's a National Remote Viewing Association or something like that. Those are legitimate organizations. There are plenty of people out there who will ask you to give them hundreds and hundreds of dollars to teach you how to do remote viewing. Don't pay any attention to them. Go to a legitimate organization first. And one of the ways you can get in touch with that, there's a great podcast called New Thinking Aloud. If you go on YouTube
Mm,
and just put in New Thinking Aloud or the name Jeffrey Mishlove, Mishlove, Jeffrey Mishlove, he has a lot of guests who were involved in the early stages of what we call today remote viewing.
mhm.
And that gives you the legitimate places, not the woo-woo places to go.
That's fantastic. Excellent.
Mhm.
So, getting back into your experiences as a priest
Mhm.
and exorcism and the paranormal, you were talking about briefly, you were talking about Ed and Lorraine Warren. And there's a few, there's Ed
Mhm.
and Lorraine Warren. I also want to kind of ask you if you knew anything about Holzer, because I find him fascinating. But let's
Okay.
start with Ed and Lorraine Warren and your experiences and your cases and what you've investigated and what you found in general in the
Okay.
paranormal.
Okay. Well, to talk about Ed and Lorraine first, excuse me. Um, after I saw them give their lecture, I went up to them and I said, I have this foundation right now for Christian psychic research, and we're looking for people to be on our advisory board, people we can go to as resources. And I asked them if they'd be interested in that. And they said, sure, they'd be happy to be on the advisory board. So I put them on the board. And then within a couple of weeks, I got a call from Ed. And he said, Father Ed, I want you to come over to our house I want to talk to you about something very serious. We need your help. So I went to the Warrens' house, went into their office, and I saw their supernatural museum, or whatever they called it. I saw Annabelle, the little doll who was supposedly possessed or whatever. And Ed started playing me recordings of different poltergeist activity and things like that they had supposedly experienced when they went on some of their investigations. And he said to me, Father, sometimes there are cases where we need an exorcist, and we're looking for resources, just like you were looking for resources for your advisory board. We're looking for priests who would be willing to come with us on investigations and do exorcisms if it seems to be appropriate. So I think I was about 25 years old at the time, and I said, sure, okay. I was really enthusiastic about all of this. Now, I had never done an exorcism before. I didn't know a lot about exorcism right away. I had seen the movie, The Exorcist, read the book. I also read in the book, The Exorcist, they mention a book that was used as a resource, a very famous resource, called Possession and Obsession by Spirits, Both Evil and Good, by somebody named Osterreich. And I had bought that and read it from cover to cover. So I knew something about exorcism, which I had not learned about in seminary. In the Episcopal Church, at least, there are no official exorcists. In the Roman Catholic Church, that's a different story. They have licensed by the diocesan bishop, licensed exorcists who are trained at the Vatican. And there's a whole protocol that they're supposed to go through when they're investigating a possible case of demonic possession. But in the Episcopal Church, we don't have that. We don't really recognize exorcism as a regular ministry. But in the Church of England, the Anglican Church, being in England, they're a lot more used to paranormal type things than we are here in the States. So they had a study that was commissioned back in the early 1970s by the Bishop of Exeter on exorcism and possession. And in that study, they had put together a ritual for exorcism of unclean spirits, whether it may be a haunting or a demonic possession case or something like that. So I had those resources. And the Episcopal Church does have our Book of Common Prayer has a lot of healing prayers in it and a service of healing. And I viewed exorcism as a form of healing, a form of spiritual healing. So I said to the Warrens, okay, you can call on me and I'll continue to do my own research and find out whatever I need to find out about exorcism. Well, a couple of weeks later, I got a call again from Ed saying, Father, we have somebody that we would like you to see. We believe that she is possessed by a demon. I'd like to come to your office and bring a recording of a session that we had at her home in New Jersey. Now, I was in Connecticut at the time. And so Ed brought this tape recording to my office. And here's where it gets a little bit dicey. Here's where my skepticism began to come into play. Ed played for me a recording that he made at the home of this girl. This was a young woman, 19, 20 years old, who had been experiencing some strange things, hearing voices and seeing shadowy shapes and that sort of thing. So Ed said to me, Father, I'm going to play you a recording of when we went to see her and interview her, and because they had heard about us somehow and wanted our help. So I said, okay, and I listened to the recording. Now, here we go. This is, I'm going to sort of recreate some of it. This is Ed Warren, sort of live in real time, narrating the recording as this whole session is unfolding. And he says, okay, now we believe that Pat is possessed by demons. First, we have some tests of what are called religious resistance. In the case of demonic possession, a demonically possessed person cannot tolerate any kind of sacred objects. They cannot come near sacred objects. They cannot tolerate being touched by sacred objects. Now, remember, this is a parentheses. Ed is in the room with the girl saying these things, and the family is there too. So he says, okay, I have a blessed crucifix in my hand, and I'm going to put it on the back of Pat's neck. If she is genuinely possessed by a demon, she won't be able to tolerate it. Here goes. I'm putting the cross on the back of her neck. So he puts this cross on the back of the neck. And this girl is going berserk, yelling and screaming. Ed starts yelling, the power of Christ commands you. I command you in the name of Jesus. And he's yelling and screaming, and you can hear these chairs being knocked over and furniture being broken. And apparently there were two big bodyguard type people there holding the girl down. She's yelling, she's screaming, Ed's yelling, Ed's screaming. As I'm listening to this, the hair is going up on the back of my neck because I had never experienced anything like this before. But at the same time, I'm saying to myself, and here's where the caveat comes in, and this as a hypnotist. Here is a young girl, very suggestible.
Mm-hmm.
Here is a, quote, world famous demonologist and ghost hunter who is telling her that she is possessed, telling her that if she's really possessed and he touches her with these things, she's going to react in a certain way. To me, in a sense, that's classic stage hypnosis.
I was going to say, he's kind of hypnotized her with all the conditions that exist.
Exactly. And he was telling her, although he wasn't saying directly to her, but he was saying in her presence, this is what's going to happen if there's a demon. Now, he had already established the fact in her mind that there were demons present in her. And now he's saying, right, this is what's going to happen if they're there. Well,
right.
There you go.
He's told her how to behave.
Exactly. She barks like a dog and she clucks like a chicken.
And so as a priest, you would never do that. If you were,
no.
You would just let it play out on its own.
Well, actually, there's the second part to this story. After listening to the recording, I said to Ed, okay, if you want to bring her to Connecticut, I will talk with her and we'll see where it goes. So they brought her to the church in which I was working, St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in Ridgefield, Connecticut. They brought her to the church, and as soon as they pulled up, I went out to the car, and before they came, I was on the phone with the parents before she came, and I told them that I was going to send them a release form that basically would say, if anything happened, if Pat were injured or somebody else there were injured, they would not hold me responsible for it. Basically a hold harmless type release form. I said, have Pat sign it and you sign it and bring it with you when you come to see me. They said, okay. So I went to them and I said, do you have the release form? May I have it? And they said, yes. And I asked them, was there any problem with Pat signing the release form? No problem at all. Now, this was my first test of religious resistance, which I didn't tell them about. It was a secret test. I had put holy water on the paper on which I did the letter around the area where she would be signing her name. So theoretically, if she were possessed, she wouldn't have been able to sign her name. She did. Okay. Religious resistance test Number two, secret religious resistance test number two. I gave Pat a handkerchief that had something inside of it. And I said, Pat, I'd like you to hold on to this while we're doing this. I didn't tell her what was in it. She didn't look in it. Inside the handkerchief was a set of rosary beads that had been given to me by a friend of mine who was a nun. Another sacred object. Pat held on to those rosary beads for the whole time that she was there. No problem whatsoever. So she failed test 1 and test 2. Test 3, we brought her into the church, up toward the altar. Theoretically, if a person is possessed by a demon, they can't even go near a church. They can't enter a church. If you ever saw the movie The Exorcist, you may remember that all of the time that they were working with the young girl who was possessed, she was at home in her bedroom. They never brought her to a church for an exorcism. It all took place in the home because theoretically, she couldn't go to the church. Now,
Right.
the next thing, as sort of a preamble to this particular case, is in the Roman Catholic Church, and Ed and Lorraine Warren consider themselves to be very devout Roman Catholics. In the Roman Catholic Church, if someone is believed to be possessed, and there's even the consideration of an exorcism, there's a long protocol that you're supposed to go through that includes a physical exam by a doctor, a psychiatric exam, a family background, to make sure that you eliminate all other possibilities before you even begin to talk about exorcism. The Warrens never did any of that. I should, as a young, because I was because I was studying all of this stuff about exorcism, I should have known better. At that time, when the Warrens said, we want to bring her to you, I should have known better, and I should have said, has she been put through the protocol?
Right.
What I did mistakenly in my youth and whatever was simply take their word for it that perhaps she was possessed. But as I said, I did my own tests of religious resistance, and she didn't pass any of them. Now, if she had, I hope I would have said, okay, let's stop right here and reassess what's going on. But because she flunked all 3 tests, I figured, okay, we can do an exorcism, we can do spiritual healing, and hopefully that'll help her. So we brought her into the church. Ed was there, Lorraine was there, the girl's parents were there, the 2 big brawny bodyguard type guys were there too, just in case. Well, I think the whole service of exorcism took maybe 20 minutes or so. And part of it is for the priest, and I was assisted by my boss, the director of the church. We both laid hands on her head and did various kinds of prayers. Again, that's something that a genuinely possessed person could not have taken very well. In the ritual for exorcism, there's a place at which the exorcist is supposed to address the demon and say, if there are any evil spirits here, I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to identify yourself by them. I said that at one point, and crickets. She didn't say anything. There was no identification. Theoretically, if there were genuinely a spirit there or a demon there, it would have to identify itself. So
Right.
my conclusion then was that there were no ghostly spirits, or I should say demonic spirits there at all. But we still went through the process.
I have a question a member in the audience has asked, and you may
Sure.
or may not be able to answer it. He said, he's asking if you've seen a show called Evil, in quotations, and if so, what are your thoughts on their take of demonology? So that depends if you've even seen it.
I have not. I'm not familiar with that.
There you go.
Where would you see that?
I have
Uh,
no idea. I haven't seen it either, so I don't know.
YouTube,
Must be.
Netflix, whatever.
I don't know. There's so
If
much.
I know, I'll check it out. And
Well, there's so many different interpretations in our culture about what evil and what it is, and it's changing so much that there's a lot of shows out about it, and I think a lot of young people are getting introduced to things probably that aren't even accurate. I don't know.
right.
I wanted to ask you though. So
Mhm.
you've worked with Ed and Lorraine Warren in a lot of their so-called. Apparently it's on CBS.
Okay.
A lot of their clients are saying they are, they're not passing your tests. Have you actually had experiences with people who were supposed to be possessed that they did pass some of these tests, like the holy water did burn them, like they were authentic?
I would have to say, to be perfectly honest, Melissa, no.
Okay.
I have never experienced in any of the investigations that I did anybody that I truly believe was possessed by a demon. I've never seen people crawling on the walls or green goop coming out of the walls or people levitating and speaking in other tongues. No. I
Interesting.
I would have to say that my sort of conclusion, and I could be wrong, is that a lot of this is grossly exaggerated.
Right.
Especially, when you consider the time, in the 70s when all of this stuff really was starting, the hype that it was getting on TV and in the movies, you can't help but expect you're being conditioned by all of these things.
Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. I mean, you really are being conditioned. I mean, I do believe in evil. I just actually did a show with
Mhm.
Dean Bertram, and we talked about serial killers. And my opinion is, if you want to go see evil, go interview a serial killer, because
Right,
that's
right,
evil. That's
right.
creepy stuff. That's
I would
top
agree
notch.
with I would agree with you
And
there 100%.
I wanted to say, okay, so you've worked on that. Did you that's demonology, which paranormal can be totally different. It doesn't necessarily
Mhm,
mean you're possessed. There's just some sort of unexplainable phenomenon that might be happening. And you said you did investigations on
mhm.
paranormal. Do you have some of your favorite cases or experiences that you can share with the audience?
Okay, well, there's one in particular that I would like to share because this was a very personal experience. And again, this was back in the 70s, and around the time that I was first ordained, I was lecturing on the church and the occult, as you mentioned in the introduction. And one night, um, I was living at that time. I was married. We had a child. We had a baby, and was living in Weymouth, Massachusetts, in a two-family house. One night, in the middle of the night, I awoke, heard my son screaming. He was probably, maybe at the most 6 months old at that time. Heard him screaming. I opened my eyes to see what was going on and tried to get up, but I couldn't. It was like there was a heavy weight on my chest. I tried to talk because I saw my wife get up out of bed and run out of the bedroom, probably to go see my son and see what was the matter there. I couldn't talk. As I spoke, it was just a sort of kind of thing, and I felt this feeling of panic because again I couldn't even get up, and this feeling stayed with me for a couple of minutes. Finally, I began to calm down. I was able to get out of bed and go into the nursery and see how things were, and everything seemed to be okay. Now, this story has a couple of different parts. This first part, well, let me tell the story, and then let me talk about the sort of analysis of what may have been going on. Uh, Shortly after that, when I say shortly after that, I mean probably within a couple of months or so, my wife and I just had to move because I got another job in another town. And as we were talking to the landlady doing our finishing paperwork, she said to me, "There's something that I didn't tell you about your side of the house." And I said, "Oh." And she said, "Well, I didn't want to tell you about this before you came because I didn't want to scare you away." Oh, she said, this is a two-family house now, but it used to be a barn. And we had a downstairs, we both had a downstairs and an upstairs. And she said the area around the staircase that goes upstairs to your side of the house, there used to be a hayloft there, and the man who originally owned the house committed suicide by hanging himself from the rafters.
Oh.
Okay. Next part of that whole story, after she told us this, my wife said to me, there's something that I didn't tell you because I didn't want to scare you either. She said, one night when you were at home, I was carrying Christopher down the stairs, and I felt something that felt like cold hands on the back of my shoulders trying to push me down the stairs. And so I grabbed the baby and grabbed the rail, and I was okay. Now, one part of that, the experience that I had, has sometimes been called sleep paralysis.
Yes, someone was mentioning that in the chat.
Okay. It's a relatively normal, although somewhat rare, experience that people have when they're transitioning from different stages of sleep. There is a particular stage of sleep, especially when you're dreaming, when there's a kind of disconnect between your brain or your mind and your body. Because if you didn't have this disconnect, the subconscious mind has difficulty distinguishing between reality and fantasy. So if, for example, you're having a dream where you're running, if the disconnect hasn't taken place, you'll be running in your bed, or you'll be jumping around or waving your hands or something like that. Well, obviously, if you're doing those kind of things all night long while you're dreaming, you'd be exhausted in the morning and you wouldn't get very much rest. So your body needs to disconnect. But if you wake up suddenly, for some reason, while you're in this deep state of sleep, sometimes called delta sleep, that disconnect hasn't had an opportunity to reconnect. So even though you're awake and you can see what's going on, you can't get up, you can't speak because the mind and the body haven't reconnected yet. And often the parts of the brain that are involved in this are also connected to a part of the brain that has to do with fear and anxiety. So that can trigger feelings of fear and anxiety. Some people throughout history have thought that there's a succubus or an incubus or something like that, or a demon on my chest, or a ghostly being on my chest. Now that by itself, I could have possibly just said, well, it was really just sleep paralysis because I was deeply asleep and Christopher started screaming, and voila. What made it to me more than just sleep paralysis is the story that I just told you about the man who had hung himself in the rafters in that part of the house. And my wife's experience, right, of feeling she was being pushed down the stairs. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. Who knows? But those are, if it was just I've also had people who had these sort of sleep paralysis experiences thinking it's just them. And then other people in their household start seeing the figure and start experiencing the same things, which I think is interesting and kind of creepy. So I'm not sure if there's different experiences happening. I've had sleep paralysis a couple
Mhm.
of times, and it was really realistic. Like you really felt like you were awake and something was crawling on you. It was
Right.
whew, it was a crazy experience, I'll tell you that. But I actually just, instead of fighting it, I just had to let go and go, oh, whatever, and then it went away. That was
Right.
really weird. Fighting it made it worse.
Yeah. Yep.
It was interesting. So who knows? I mean, I don't know. I think there's more than one explanation for things,
Yes.
definitely.
Yes. And it could also always be a combination of different things. You know,
Yeah.
one thing leads to another. If you genuinely see somebody who is threatening you, that can set off all sorts of things, because the a lot of our behavior is really determined by the content of our subconscious mind. It's like fears and phobias. If you your response to a dog, if when you were a child you grew up with a very positive experience of the family dog, when for the rest of your life, when you go out and see a dog, hey, that's great, I love dogs. But if when you were a child, your neighbor's Rottweiler jumped over the fence, pounced on you, and bit your face, and that was your first basic experience of dog, that's in your subconscious mind. And it's
Yes.
going to it's going to color any of your experiences having to do with dog for the rest of your life.
Well, it's true, and you're gonna have a phobia and a fear. Now,
Mm.
there's this show, I think it's on Prime, Amazon Prime, and me and my husband started watching it. It's called The Holzer Files. It's about Hans Holzer's.
Mhm.
His there's a couple of there's a psychic medium, and then they have an investigator and a tech guy, and I think his daughter's involved. And they go back on all his files because apparently he wrote over 100 books. Like he's a really
Mm.
prolific investigator. So they go over his files and they try to reinvestigate. And I found it kind of interesting and fascinating because he did do some historical research, but he used a lot of psychic mediums. And I know Lorraine was
Mm.
supposed to be a psychic medium. So how do you feel about that kind of psychic medium as a research tool or a tool for paranormal investigations?
Okay. Well, again, I have mixed feelings about it.
Mhm.
It can possibly be helpful. For example, in one of the cases in which I worked, um, and I'm trying to make sure I get the right one here. There was a family that was experiencing what they felt was poltergeist phenomena. I won't go into details at the moment, but to respond to your question, well, first of all, because I've had some training, psychic training, and I'm not a medium, and I don't consider myself a psychic. I'm a person who has fortunately developed their psychic abilities, and I believe everybody has psychic abilities. This was a situation where I went in and tried to pick up any kind of sensations that I might pick up there. Didn't get very much, although I get some kind of uncomfortable feelings. I believe, well, there was one medium who came in and tried to psych things out, tried to see if there were any spirits there. And they came up with a story about a person who had, a woman who had beaten her child to death because her husband made her do it. And then we had another medium come in who, we didn't give them any information whatsoever about this. And they came up with some of the same details. Now that's, I think, a kind of case where you have two psychics who are coming up with the same details, who have not compared notes in any way. So that says to me, well, okay, maybe there is something here. Because whenever you do these kinds of investigations, it's just like a police investigation, looking for information that's going to corroborate what you already have. And that gives it more
Right.
believability, more veracity. So in that sense, I think they can be helpful. In another sense, and this gets back to the Warrens for a moment, and perhaps one of the reasons that the Warrens and I eventually parted ways, in one of the investigations that I did with them, they asked me to come in and do a house exorcism, basically, because they didn't think there was a person possessed, but they said they believed that there were spirits in this particular house. And what we had to go on was Lorraine had gone into the house and she did her thing and spoke with whatever, and that was it. So it was only on her say so that I went in. And this was one of the problems too that I felt with Ed. He, as the demonologist, would make the pronouncement, there is a demon here. Lorraine would make the pronouncement, there is a spirit here. That's it. We don't need any corroboration. We know it. And that makes me very skeptical.
Yeah, well, also the fact I found, like, they seem to want to be like, to get into something that looked like, say, the Enfield or Amityville, and they kind of seem like they want to go in and take over, and it seemed very
Mm,
marketing, and it was
mm,
about making money, whereas the people who were investigating, like Enfield, the original British investigators, were really turned off by that,
mhm. Well,
so there's really this need to control the whole situation with them, I would think.
right. In fairness to Ed and Lorraine, as far as I know, they never made money directly from the people who were involved there.
Right.
Their money came from the books,
The books.
later on movies and their lectures, that sort of thing. So
Right.
they weren't like the psychic or the medium who comes in and says, well, cross my palms with silver and I'll tell you everything
Mhm.
you ever wanted to know. That's not the
Right.
kind of thing that they did. Theirs was kind of collateral, like collateral damage. I don't want to use the word collateral damage really, but I'm trying to think of uh, the right term for it when you make money from something on the outside rather than from the inside of what you're doing. I know there's a term for it, but I can't
Right.
think of it.
Well, and I think that's why they wanted to get in there because then they can connect themselves with that event, and especially if it's
Mm.
like a media frenzy, like the Amityville horror for whatever.
Mhm.
There was the real horror was the murder that happened there, the mass murder that happened there the year before, and I mean,
Right.
we play into it partly as an audience, so we create the frenzy, and I mean, there's an opportunity to make money, and they know that.
Mhm.
And
That's
they
right.
have a belief, maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. They have a belief about the paranormal and they're sort of, they want to attach themselves to these locations. And I mean, I think it's fair game. They have a right to sell their books and say what they
Mhm.
think is happening. I mean,
Sure.
fair game, but it's like you said, like they should be having other psychics or other people, the input too, because that would make
Right.
their case stronger.
Yeah. And that's exactly the reason why the Roman Catholic Church, as I said, before they'll okay an exorcism, you have to go through all of these steps to make
Yes.
sure that it's kind of like even a surgery. If your doctor looks at you and says, oh, I think you have to have surgery for this, sometimes you get another opinion because maybe there's something else that they didn't see. They didn't read an x-ray right or something like that. So any of the paranormal stuff, it always helps to have a number of different resources come in and look at it from different points of view.
Excellent. Did you ever meet Hans Holzer, or did you know anything about him?
I was aware of him. He and there was a woman by the name of Sybil Leek who
Mhm.
was a witch, and I think she may have been a medium too. And I seem to remember Sybil Leek and Hans Holzer kind of working together. I was quite aware of them while they were doing their thing, but that was, I think, mostly a little bit before I really got involved uh, in all of this stuff. But I do have a kind of a Hans Holzer story uh, where six separation thing. I was doing
Absolutely.
a remote viewing experiment with a talk show host from Alberta, Canada, trying to identify
I
something
actually
that he
live there,
was.
that's where my family's from.
Oh, okay.
Alberta. Yeah, I used
I,
to live
I,
there.
I don't remember what his name was, but he had a great voice and he had a great show. And he had me on and he said, "Okay, Father Ed, I'm looking at something here in the studio. Can you tell me what I'm looking at?" And I began to describe a fence, like a split rail fence or something like that, and with horses or cattle. And he got so flustered by what I was saying that he said, "I have to go to a commercial." And he calmed down a little bit and he said, "Father Ed, that's exactly what I'm looking at. The wood on the wall opposite where I am is kind of a split rail effect, and I was looking directly at a picture of a horse." And then he said to me, "You know, I tried this same experience with Hans Holzer a few weeks ago, and you did much better than he did."
Well,
So
there you go.
that, that was a feather in my cap.
Well, there you go. I mean, what are the like, how is I mean, we talked about how to start, and when when Ed's talking about when I asked him about how to start, there was a couple of comments on Twitter. I just want to reiterate, he was, it was I was
Mhm,
asking for a basic. Someone said that's not all remote viewing. I said, but Ed's not telling us all of remote viewing. He was just giving a basic where to start. But what are the 10, like,
mhm.
how does it work that that you think that the mind can do that and see things when, like, is there some kind of connection between humans? Like, what's making that happen?
That's a really complicated question, and it gets down to the nature of consciousness. There are those who believe in the quote scientific community that your consciousness is entirely encapsulated in your brain. Brain and mind are the same thing. But there are others who are more in the parapsychological community who believe that consciousness extends beyond your brain, that mind is not simply encapsulated in your brain. And in that sense, then you can reach out and be- become aware of all the knowledge of the universe because we're connected in some way that we don't understand now with the science that we have now, because this is all about consciousness. It's not about physical things. These are non-physical connections that we have. And there are remote viewers who have gone into the past, into the future, different countries, different planets. And but one of the ways that I like to look at it is something that I learned when I was studying the Silva Method. Their idea was that what you are doing is projecting your awareness or your consciousness to another place or another time in the universe and becoming aware of things that are happening there. Some people might call this astral projection. I don't really think of it that way. I don't think of us as having an astral body that you shoot out of your, you know, out of your body and it goes somewhere else, but rather simply projecting your awareness to another place. And I guess one of the ways you can look at this is kind of like a radio or even a cell phone or a television. I mean, nowadays, we don't have wires that are connecting us all over the place like we did with early telephones. That was all connected by wires.
Hear
Now,
that, Gen Z? Is it Gen Z?
right, right. Um, now, all we communicate with each other through the Ethernet. There are cell towers that are sending signals out into the atmosphere or whatever, and our cell phones are picking them up. So, in a sense, our mind, not our brain necessarily, but our mind and maybe our brain working together are something like cell phones. And they can reach out, they can call a number and reach out and get information about things that are going on at different places. I mean, one of the things in the early days of remote viewing, one of the ways they would test people is that they would give them map coordinates and say to them, okay, this latitude, this longitude, what do you see? and kinds of impressions, and have judges take a look at the results. And they had a lot of, in the early days with Project Stargate, they had a lot of accuracy, amazing accuracy, pinpoint accuracy, pinpoint to the degree of looking inside a file cabinet at certain file folders. That specific.
Wow. Sometimes I wonder if they based a lot of this technology that we see today, if they based it on, humans and that kind of theory. They're like, oh, well, humans can do this. Maybe we should make it more effective and on command. And, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you're right, because well, the computer, take a look at the computer. I think that's basically a brain. It has, you have to input information into it, and it does what it can to analyze it, and then it outputs information. Well, that's what your brain does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's
exactly.
it's the hard drive of a computer is very much like your subconscious mind.
I sometimes think a lot of this technology that we have is why we're having like ADHD and problems focusing. Because before cell phones, before computers, I could read books all the time. And now I feel like I'm like distracted all the time
Right.
with all of this, I don't know. Maybe I should just go live out in the middle of nowhere.
No. Yeah, it does. I think, again, talking about conditioning, I think that one of the things that we've done because of all of this multimedia stuff, we have conditioned our attention spans to be shorter.
Yeah.
In the old days, if you had a burning question about something and you wanted more knowledge about it, you had to walk yourself down to the library. Remember what that is?
Use the Dewey Decimal System.
Use the Dewey Decimal System in the card catalog and find yourself a BOOK, a book, and open it up and read it. Then you could
maybe some microfilm.
That's right. That's right. I used to, when I was a kid, when I was interested in the paranormal and in magic and hypnosis, that's what I did. First, as a young kid, I went to the library and looked up as much as I could. And the librarians in the little branch library that I went to, they knew me, and they would sometimes go to the main library and get books about all kinds of stuff that they thought I might be interested in. And then as I got a little bit older and began to have some money, I would go to bookstores and buy books.
And well,
Now,
I still do on Amazon, but then I have a pile of them,
Good.
and I'm like, oh my God, you need to put that phone down and read these books.
Right. Well, the way I always looked at books is I used to have a huge collection of books, and I had certainly not read all of them. But the important thing for me then was that I had access to the information that I wanted. Now we have instant access to all the, you ready for this? All the knowledge in the universe, practically. All the knowledge in the world, of the known world, on this little machine that you hold in your hand.
Yeah.
And if you think parapsychologically, in this little thing that you have in your head, your brain/mind, you also have access to all the knowledge in the universe. And this could also possibly explain ghostly sightings.
Oh.
The idea of place memory. I don't know if your viewers are familiar with that. And what is it? The stone tapes.
Stone tape theory.
Familiar with stone tape theory.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
right.
you can elaborate on that if you want.
Okay, this is all based on the idea that when there's some kind of intense emotional situation, that the emotion, the vibrations from that experience can actually be absorbed by objects around the emotional experience. That sometimes can be called, place memories, so that you go into a certain place and all of a sudden your mind is filled with memories of different things that have gone on. Maybe you see people walking the halls, the corridors in old clothes and things like that. Usually these are places where something that had a lot of emotional impact happened. And that's what gets the vibration into the stones or the trees, the stairs, the walls,
Whatever's in the
whatever
environment.
whatever's in the environment. And if you go in with let me put it this way. If you walked into a room and you had an old rotary phone, you wouldn't pick anything up. But if you go into a room with a cell phone, you can pick a lot of things up. So, if you have the right training, if you have the right frame of mind, then you're going to be able to pick these things up through your consciousness. And that's where the training and meditation and things like that come in. And I would recommend, simply talking from my own experience, and I am not endorsing a product that I get paid to endorse or anything like that, but I would recommend that people look into the Silva Method. It's available free on YouTube, the SILVA, Silva Method. And it teaches you, and again, this gets back to hypnosis. The Silva Method is basically a form of group hypnosis and self-hypnosis that teaches you how to unleash the abilities that you already have. It's not giving you something that you don't have. It's simply releasing the abilities that you already have as a human being.
That's fascinating. Silva Method, for anyone who wants to know, Google that one. So just before we tie it up,
Mhm.
I have a question because you briefly mentioned Annabelle the doll. I've watched the Warrens' son-in-law. He runs their YouTube channel. So I've gone over there and
Mhm.
peeked at some of the videos, and they have the tours. Have you ever been by the Annabelle doll or in their museum of their sort of cursed objects?
Yes. Yes. As I mentioned earlier in the show, the first time that I went to talk with Ed Warren, he showed me through their occult museum and showed me Annabelle, told me about it, wouldn't let me touch it. It was, again, it was behind glass. I had no desire to touch it. He also showed me that famous or infamous door that they say are all kinds of possessed objects behind that no one should enter. I think there's a sign on it or something like that that says "Do not enter." I went there. I was in the museum. I didn't get any spooky vibrations. The only thing that was spooky was the tape recording of the alleged poltergeist activity that Ed played for me. But yes, I
Right.
was there. I saw Annabelle.
Saw Annabelle because, I mean, it is possible, like we were talked about stone tape theory. I mean, it's
Hmm.
that theory that objects absorb things, and there's this, what is it? Is it psychometry? What is it where they put their hands
Right.
on and they read
Exactly.
psychics read objects. So it's possible. That's why I asked, like,
Hmm.
did you get anything? Because I don't know. They say they collect them at different places, but I mean, it depends if it was real or the doll was really haunted or not.
Yeah, that I couldn't say because I didn't try
Touching.
I didn't try touching anything. I didn't try psyching anything out there. I didn't try, I didn't go in.
Okay.
Sometimes when I've gone into haunted houses, I just try to absorb anything I can, and like with the remote viewing, what do I feel? What do I taste? What do I hear? What do I see? That sort of thing. I did not do that in the Warrens Museum. Maybe
Well,
deliberately. It was a long time ago.
yeah, I'm
50.
sure. I'm sure it grew since then. And his son-in-law and his daughter, they. I mean, I don't blame them. I would be sort. I mean, his son-in-law, the
Mhm.
guy, they used to participate with him, and they ran a talk show on, I don't know, a local station and everything. I've gone back and
Mhm.
watched it. I mean, it's interesting. I
It
I,
is.
I mean, I don't know. I think Lorraine. I think they believed religiously what they were saying. It's just whether or
Mhm.
not, like you said, it's true or not.
That's right. And in all fairness to them, I do believe that they were not deliberate charlatans or something like that. I believe that they believed very much in what they were doing, and that what they were doing is trying to help people who were in distress.
Yeah.
And in many instances, I'm sure that they probably did. But I have to, again, a caveat, it may also be that they put some people in more
Pharaoh.
stress they needed to be,
Yeah.
but not
And that's
because they
why the
were
churches yeah, that's why the churches go through a process and explore other things before they
Mhm.
get to the, "Oh my god, it's Satan."
Right. Exactly.
Exactly. Well, I wanna
Mm.
thank you for coming on the show. This was wonderful. I'd love to have you back
Mhm.
again at a future
Sure.
date. Is there any sort of last, words of wisdom that we can part ways about,
Hmm.
demonology or the paranormal or anything meaningful or any experience that you would like to end the show with?
Okay. I would just say and kind of reiterate what we've said before. When you're dealing with the paranormal, the parapsychological or ghosts, demons, anything like that, tread softly, tread gently. You don't know what it could be. It could be something genuinely dangerous because again, we're not talking physical things. We're not talking about something like a guy standing there with a gun. We're talking about things that happen on the level of the mind and the spirit. And that's a lot more vulnerable than the physical level. So in going into the paranormal, just be careful, be aware, be open-minded, and be skeptical.
I'm
That
back.
would be my parting message.
John
Okay.
aside says, "Great
Okay.
show," so I just want to say he's loving I've had lots of amazing comments. My
Thank you.
friend Jer, he runs a podcast. He's like, "I want him on." So I know if you hear from
Sure
Jer,
thing.
that's why.
Okay.
It was fantastic, and it was wonderful to have you on. Like I said, I mean, to have that information, I mean,
Mhm.
at a period of time, I mean, my ex is called Make 70s Great. I love the 70s.
Mhm.
I know you like Dark Shadows. I kinda tried to
Oh,
deck this
yes.
place out, kinda shadowy and whatnot, so I'm glad to
Mhm.
have you on and share all your wisdom
Looks
and your
good.
experiences. I thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you very much,
Sure.
Melissa. I really
All
appreciated
right.
the opportunity to be on, and
Excellent.
I wish all of your guests well.
Perfect. Excellent.
Peace.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining in. I'm going to cap this off right now. Please remember to subscribe, share, and like on the live stream here. And of course, like, once again, if you're on the audio version, which I will upload later, remember, give this show 5 stars. It helps us grow, helps it show up on those charts. I think we're under history and some other category, but support us that way. I know you can't afford everything. And like I said, a click goes a long way. You can find all our episodes, all the content at ghostlyarchives.com. And I will see you guys next time. Next week is Jen Doral. She's coming on and she's got what is it? Time slips? Time slips in the paranormal with Jen Doral. And the week after that, I have Emily Menshouse. And then at the end of December, where Did the Road Go? Soraya Azkath is coming on to talk about his strange experiences. So don't don't miss it. And I will be reminding you all, thank you very much. And we will talk to you later, guys. Bye.